Hey YouTube, Alex Conley here, and today I want to talk about some of the downsides of extended travel. Now, some people may be thinking already, downsides, what downside is there? It's total freedom, go wherever you want, stay however long you want, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there are some downsides. So let's go ahead and get into the first downside. First downside is swapping SIM cards. So I've gone through, in the last couple of months, 5 or 6 different SIM cards. Each country has different telecom providers. Each country has different pricing on data. Each country has different plan options. For example, in the Philippines, I had to go and buy data basically every day. I had to go to the store and buy extra data because I use a lot of data. I'm doing uploads, I'm watching videos, I'm listening to music, I'm walking around these different cities. Swapping SIM cards every day can get, or not every day, but every couple of weeks can be challenging. Now, if you're staying in one place for a month at a time, maybe less so. But if I were to have retained my plan with AT&T in the US, they charge $10 a day for international usage. So I'd be paying $300 a month for internet service, which is really expensive, especially when you consider in Cambodia, you're looking at I think $12 to $15 a month for data. Here in Kuala Lumpur, I'd pay probably $20 to $30 a month for data. Much cheaper than keeping my US plan and paying the premium to retain that. Now, AT&T is a great company. They offer a convenient service, but it's not cheap. And so keep in mind that if you're not looking to pay that premium, that you're going to be dealing with different SIM cards on a regular basis, and you're going to have to keep up with them. And you're going to have to be swapping. Currently I'm using Cellcom. I can't even remember the company I was using in Cambodia before this, but yeah, different SIM cards in each country, unless you want to pay the premium to retain your Western service. And I don't even know if that's available for residents of UK, Canada, or Australia. I'm simply talking about the US. But next, you're going to be swapping currency. So the vast majority of countries, Cambodia is an exception. They do use US dollars there right now. But the vast majority of countries are going to use a different currency than what you're used to. So here in Malaysia, I'm doing this math where $1 equals about 4 ringgit. But now when I go to Thailand, we're looking at more like $1 equals about 30 baht, 30 Thai baht. So keep in mind that every time you change countries, for the most part, you're going to be doing different kinds of math. I think in Mexico, it's like $1 equals about 20 pesos. So this is something to keep in mind, that when you swap countries, don't think, oh, well, this country, I'm going to Thailand, so I'll bring ringgit. No, you've got to, each time you go to a new country, you're going to have to do the math on what things cost, and things are not always costing the same. Like I said, before, Cambodia has relatively low data prices. I may pay half of what I would pay here. So this is something to keep in mind, that if you're going from country to country, the exchange rates are going to be different. Even countries that use a dollar, $1 is not the same as $1 Australian dollar. $1 is not the same as $1 Singaporean dollar. You're going to have to do some math if you're going to be doing extended travel, especially if your extended travel is going to include multiple countries. Next, so, where I'm from in the United States, we speak English. English is prevalent throughout the United States. And there are times where, depending on the country I'm in, I miss English. So English has been prevalent in Philippines, Cambodia, and here in Malaysia. But now when I was in Japan, English was not as prevalent. When I was I'm trying to think of where else I've been. English is not always prevalent. Depends on where you go. But you're not always going to be able to count on speaking English with people. And even if you do go to places where there is some English, keep in mind that the individual you're interacting with, their English may be limited to business communications. They may be able to figure out, a little bit, do you have this item or do you have that item in stock? But as far as complex conversations, as far as discussing, complicated subjects, you're not going to have the same ease as you would in your home country. And the same goes for other languages. Like, let's say you're from Germany and you speak German as your first language. Keep in mind that if you go to another country, you can't necessarily count on them speaking German. Translation apps help somewhat, but it's not the same as speaking in a fluid conversation as using a translation app. I've used a translation app some, and they do come in handy, but once again, it's not the same feeling as having a, start to finish conversation and communicating at a quick pace, and certain little like subtle things that are about your culture or language just may not translate to where you're at. And kind of following up on missing English, missing being able to speak the English. I do call back home sometimes just so I can get that feeling of like, well, one, catching up with the people I care about, and two, I can have these animated conversations about things that with people that I have certain things in common with. But next, I find myself mixing up languages sometimes. So this is particularly true in like when I left Japan for Cambodia. There were several times where my knee-jerk reaction was to say "sumimasen," excuse me if I bumped into somebody or I needed to get by somebody, but Japanese is not commonly spoken in Cambodia. So me saying "sumimasen" to people don't know what I'm saying. They don't know, they don't understand. That's not going to work. So if you do extended travel and you are traveling for a long period of time and you stay in one, let's pretend I stayed in Japan for about 2 weeks. Let's pretend I'd stayed there for a month, went to another country. It might take several days for me to get out of the mindset of using basic Japanese phrases. So keep in mind that that's a downside of long-term travel, that you may get used to one language and then find that it doesn't work in the next country that you visit. Next, something that's going to may bother you about long-term travel is figuring out your way to and from hotels. So each of the countries I've been to, there have been different options depending to get to and from my accommodation. So in some countries like Japan, you can take a train really easily. In other countries like Kuala Lumpur, you could save $10 by taking a bus over the train. So there's going to be a little bit more legwork and planning involved in taking the bus, but $10 will buy a couple of meals here in Cambodia. $10 or here in Malaysia. In Cambodia, a little bit different. I feel like there might have been some buses, but the more common way is to take the Pass app. So that for me, that involved taking a tuk-tuk. So to get to and from my hotel, I've walked. I've taken a tuk-tuk. I've taken a cab. I've taken a bus. I've taken a train. I haven't taken a bicycle yet, but depending on the country you go to, you're going to have to create a plan. How am I getting to and from my accommodation? And that's not going to be the same everywhere you go. That could change, from country to country. Some countries have, one of those options. Some countries have all of them. And some countries, one option may be incredibly expensive. Like, I didn't take any cabs in Japan because cabs are very expensive in Japan. Very, very expensive. And that wasn't gonna, be, as far as my budget is concerned, that wasn't gonna make a lot of sense compared to taking the local train. So that's something to think about, is that if you are doing long-term travel, traveling to multiple countries, you're not just gonna be planning for the first country that you go to the second. You may have to make plans for half a dozen countries or more, maybe a dozen countries. It just depends on how long you're traveling and where all you're planning on going to. The next one, if you're swapping hotels, you're gonna have to plan for the discrepancy between checkout time of one hotel and check-in time of another. So like with this Airbnb I'm staying in, the host offered, hey, by the way, my current guests need to check out late. I'll give you half price on the first night if if you can come late. So she said, well, if you come by at 6:30 p.m., that's about when we'll have it ready. So my checkout time at my previous hotel, was noon. So I couldn't just go direct from that hotel to here. There's a 6.5 hour gap there where this place would not be ready. And that place, I needed to check out, or I probably could have paid a fee, but I didn't really want to stay there anyway. It wasn't, my favorite hotel. So I had to find some things to do for 6.5 hours. Now, fortunately, I'm in class right now, so I have things to occupy my time. I also enjoy making these videos. I enjoy taking notes and making outlines for videos. I like drinking coffee. I enjoy eating. There's different things that I could do, but that's something to keep in mind, is that if you're really tired and you don't feel like being around a lot of people, or don't feel like going to a coffee shop, don't want to be out in the elements. Let's say it's raining. These are some things to consider, that if you are swapping hotels every so often, that you'll have times where you don't have anything to do in between checkout time of one place and check-in time of another. Like I said, this is a little bit more mitigated if you're staying in a certain place for a month at a time, but for those who are staying for like a week or two at a time, a little bit more consideration is needed for that. Next, unpredictable Wi-Fi situation. So some countries have great Wi-Fi, some countries have terrible Wi-Fi. Some cities in some countries have great Wi-Fi, whereas others, if you're going to more remote areas, you may not have that good of Wi-Fi. When I was in the Philippines, for example, there were instances where it took like 6 and 7 hours to upload a video, simply because the internet was that slow. And because of the upload taking so much of the bandwidth, I would get booted from it. The system would basically be overloaded and say, oh, no, you need to get off, you're asking too much for the purpose, these purposes. So keep in mind that you're not going to always count on good Wi-Fi. In fact, I've had great Wi-Fi here at this place, this Airbnb in Kuala Lumpur, but a certain blogger, guy named Jason, he runs Mr. Free at 33. He was talking about how he was getting like 5 megabits per second here in Kuala Lumpur at his Airbnb. So that's relatively slow. So keep in mind, even within the same city, it's luck of the draw. You may not have good Wi-Fi, and if you require good Wi-Fi to work, that's something that you need to plan for ahead of time. So I always ask now, after I read about his experience, I always ask when I contact potential hosts or hotels, hey, what are the Wi-Fi speeds like? Am I going to need to rely on purchasing data for my cell phone and using my phone as a mobile hotspot? This is something to consider, because if you're relying on Wi-Fi like I am, I have to have Wi-Fi to either Wi-Fi or tethering to do my classwork on time. It would be totally unacceptable for me to have Wi-Fi so slow that the connection's poor and drops me during a test. I could have some really bad repercussions from that. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you can't always count on, when you're traveling for a long period of time, on Wi-Fi staying stable throughout your trip. I had great Wi-Fi in Japan. All the convenience stores have free Wi-Fi. But when I went back to Cambodia, there were instances in my first hotel when I went back where the Wi-Fi signal was terrible. I was trying to call back to the States and the call kept getting dropped. It was just, it was not good. So that's something to keep in mind, is you may not be able to rely on Wi-Fi stability when you are traveling in the long term. You want to, if you really have to have it, you want to contact your accommodation and do your research on data plans to make sure that that's not going to be a pain point for you. So moving on from unpredictable Wi-Fi situation, flight delays and cancellations. So if you're traveling for a long period of time and you book your flights every so often, things may come up. Like 3 weeks into my trip, I was in the Philippines and found out that my return flight to the United States was canceled. They didn't explain why. This was prior to the coronavirus situation. I just got an email saying, hey, we canceled this. You need to figure out when you want to reschedule. So that threw off, not only did that throw off my plans to return to the States, that also threw off my flights within the States. So that turned out to be a pretty costly issue. Now, luckily I have some insurance, so that's going to cover part of the costs that I incurred from the schedule change. But keep in mind that if you're planning on long-term travel, you're not just thinking about, okay, I'm going from the United States to this other country and then back. You're thinking about, okay, I'm going from the US to this country to this country, this country to this country, this country to this country, and then going back. So you're juggling a lot, So keep in mind that if you're doing long-term travel, you're not just accounting for getting from point A to B and point B to point A. You're thinking about point A to B to C to D to E to F to G, back to A. So that's something to consider, is that if you book too much in advance and something goes wrong, that can be really problematic. So I suggest booking in a reasonable advance where you're not paying last minute prices, but don't book so much in advance that you don't have any flexibility and you end up spending a lot if something goes wrong. It's air travel and travel in general is becoming more and more democratized as we head forward into the future. Now that may change, but for right now, it's becoming more and more accessible, and it's not this extreme luxury that it has been historically speaking. Now it's still a luxury to travel, but I don't believe it's something that only the 1% can do. Even if it's within your country, like I said, just be willing to be flexible. Consider that if you have a bunch of moving parts, that trying to be super rigid is not the best plan for long-term travel. So keep in mind that if you are doing long-term travel, flight delays and cancellations can make a bigger impact on you than somebody who's just doing a short-term trip. So kind of wrapping up, last couple of points we got here. No Amazon. So I like shopping occasionally on Amazon for some things I need, whether it be shoes, whether it be electronics, video equipment. From my understanding, there's no Amazon here in Malaysia. Now there is Amazon in Japan, but many countries don't have access to Amazon, and certainly even if they have Amazon, they might not have one click buy it now, next day arrival, or 2 day later arrival like you're used to in the States. So you may have to pay a premium for certain things, and haggle for certain things that you wouldn't in the States. Like there were several memory cards I needed to buy when I was in Cambodia, and I paid 3 or 4 times the price that I would have paid in the United States for these items. Same in certain areas of the Philippines. I just didn't have a choice. I needed some of these memory cards and backups, and now I know better, but keep in mind that if you're going on a long-term trip, try to account, what am I going to need in this country? What am I going to need in that country? What am I going to need in the 3rd, 4th, 5th country? And if these aren't super space intensive things, like in my case, memory cards do not take up a lot of space, they don't weigh a lot, buy them in your home country. A big one that I'm glad I bought was I bought a power bank back in the United States, and I saved probably at least 10 or 20 bucks. And hassle of trying to determine which one do I want and haggling and all these other things. Some of the things that you can bring, from your home country, things that you'll purchase on Amazon, buy them there and bring them with you. Now, if it's going to be significantly cheaper where you're in your destination, I can't think of specific examples off the top of my head, but if it's going to be significantly cheaper in your destination, wait till you get there. But yeah, if you can plan ahead, bring what you can in advance, as long as it's not too heavy and bulky, as long as you're not going to pay more than the savings difference in baggage fees and these types of things. It's worth looking into buying certain things in your home country, because you may not, when you're long-term traveling, you may not have access to this online shopping convenience like you do for me in the United States. Finally, this is kind of a wild card, but if you're used to drinking tap water, if you're doing long-term travel, you may find that in some of the countries you go to, you can't drink the tap water. Philippines, I don't want to pick on the Philippines, but it's a good example just because they speak English there, so it remains relatively popular for American expats that speak English. But I'll try to think. India is another example. I'll pick on India a little bit because I'm half Indian, but in India, you can't count on drinking the tap water. In fact, I don't think I would in many parts of India. So you may have to incur the cost of bottled water, not just buying one bottle of water, but no, you're accounting for buying and carrying and paying a premium for bottled water throughout your trip. So you're not just buying one. You're gonna, through, let's say you're traveling for 60 days and you drink 1.5 liters a day, you're going to need to account for the cost in carrying 90 liters over the course of your trip. You're not going to carry 90 liters at once, but that's something to keep in mind, that you may have to pay $1 every time, so that may add some extra money that comes out of your budget. So that's just kind of a wild card for long-term travel. I appreciate you watching my video. If you enjoy this video, you want to see more, If you have any extra tips for long-term travelers, anything that you see as a disadvantage to taking longer trips, let us know down in the comments. There's a lot to consider. There's a lot to keep in mind, and I'm trying to think if I have any more. Another one that I would say could be a disadvantage would be, car maintenance. Before you leave, you're going to want to fill up your car with gas. That'll help keep the seal moisturized. You'll want to change the oil. You'll want to get your tires rotated. You may want to clean your house. There's precautions that you want to take before you leave on a long trip. Another big one is, since I enjoy traveling, I don't have pets. I just don't feel like it would be right to have pets and to leave them for months at a time. Now, cats and dogs are different. With a cat, maybe, it's a little less of an issue, but with a dog, you really don't want to leave your dog for several months. It's not fair, and so that's something to consider. That's another downside of long-term travel, that if you're going to leave for an extended period of time, you're probably going to have to make some lifestyle adjustments. And I certainly have had to make lifestyle adjustments that I can't really be flexible on, because I do desire to travel for long periods of time. I want to be able to take long trips. I want to be able to see a lot of the world, and that does require sacrifice. But thank you for watching. And like I said, if you think of any disadvantages to long-term travel that I haven't mentioned in this video, let me know down in the comments. I'll probably do a follow-up video covering more disadvantages, things that bother me about long-term travel, because I think that sometimes there's a misperception that it's all, glamorous, laying on beaches and staying in beautiful buildings and eating exotic food. And there's certainly some things that need to be considered, more than just the good parts and more than just the good times. But thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.